As the Age of Darkness approached, the all-consuming flame of war spread throughout the galaxy, reducing worlds and armies to ashes, often leaving no survivors who could speak of the sacrifices made and atrocious deeds committed. During this time, each of the legions utilized unique formations, employing unconventional styles of warfare, resorting, at their discretion or by necessity, to abhorrent tactics and weaponry. Many such units were lost in the grim years following the Horus heresy, their traditions obliterated and weapon stocks depleted. However, records of some survived, preserved in these documents, so that future generations might learn of the horrors unleashed upon the galaxy by the traitorous sons of the Emperor, as well as the valiant heroes who opposed them. The third planet of the Isstvan system was once capable of sustaining life, but after Horus's atrocities, it became a viral mass grave. Its population turned into dirty ash, scattered across continents, with charred pieces of scorched stone that once were skyscrapers serving as tombstones. This dead world lingered in the silent orbit of its sun, becoming a monumental testament to absolute devastation and the impending doom of the Imperium. When the last survivors were executed, the War Master's fleet moved towards Isstvan V. They still had at their disposal the unrivaled might of 4 legions, millions of armed mortals, tanks and artillery, as well as dark mechanicum transports carrying the titans of Legio Mortis. The War Master understood that the Imperium still outnumbered his legions, but the loyal Astartes were unlikely prepared to spill the blood of their own kind, and this would be their downfall. Whether truth or falsehood, time would reveal, yet the War Master remained unwavering in his desire to strike a blow whose echo would resonate through millennia, like the tolling of a funeral bell. But time was against him. When Horus made the first steps towards insurrection, he ordered Fulgrim to meet with the Primarch of the Iron Hands and sway him to his cause. The Phoenician was confident he could persuade his brother and bring him under the War Master's banner, but Ferrus Manus refused, sparking a battle aboard the Iron Hands flagship. Horus was infuriated by the Phoenician's failure, but he still needed to prepare for the inevitable imperial response, which was now to follow much sooner than expected. Fulgrim was tasked with delivering his legion to the ruins of the Xeno fortress on Isstvan V, and preparing the surface for the final phase of operations. This wounded the pride of the Emperor's children's Primarch, for digging trenches and wallowing in the dirt was the domain of legions like the Iron Warriors. The War Master, however, reassured his brother, explaining that this was the most important phase and that he could entrust this task to no one else. Thus, Fulgrim oversaw numerous excavation teams of the Dark Mechanicum, forming an extensive network of trenches, bunkers and redoubts along the mountain ridge. In the shadow of the fortress walls, anti-aircraft batteries were installed, and in hidden underground depots lay orbital torpedoes on mobile platforms. The command itself had settled in the fortress, which had become an impregnable bastion. Now, the Loyalist legionaries had no way to eliminate Horus with an orbital strike, and they would have to descend to the surface. After the frigate Isstvan brought news of heresy to the solar system, Rogel Dawn sent a call to the loyal legions to destroy the 5 traitors entrenched on Isstvan and eliminate Horus Lupercal. In the first wave, the Iron Hands, Salamanders and Raven Guard were to attack, followed by the landing of the second wave, consisting of the Night Lords, Alpha Legion, Iron Warriors, and a large contingent of Word-Bearers. Few pondered why warp travel to Isstvan was difficult in many places, as a dispatched part of the Imperial Fist's fleet sent by Dawn was forced to return, while the Salamanders and Raven Guard managed to transition without hindrance. In such a sequence of events, one could see the hand of ruinous powers, yet even in such tragic circumstances, humanity remained blissfully ignorant. Horus's actions were perceived as a local rebellion, and no one even suspected the scale and horror of his betrayal. His motives and the murderous depth of his ambitions were unclear, for the forces of the Imperium believed in their invincibility thanks to technology and numerical superiority. Often in military councils there were suggestions that the warlord had gone mad, or his mind was controlled by a hostile Xenos race. Regardless of disagreements, The decision regarding him was made quickly and harshly because he had 4 legiones Astartes on his side, and the threat he posed was the highest. Firstly, because the Emperor's most beloved of Primarchs had risen against him. Secondly, he could well create his own galactic empire, capable of becoming a major rival to the Imperium of mankind. Now, looking back, such a notion seems laughable, but at that time it was more than logical, as was the choice of Isstvan as a stronghold, for it was located at the intersection of warp routes far from Terra. The first vessel to arrive in the system was a reconnaissance corvette of the Raven Guard called the Tempest. It was well shielded from auspexes and equipped with scanning systems that no other legion was likely to possess. Thus, the approaching punitive fleet soon received the first reconnaissance data from Tempest. These indicated that an incredibly large bastion was being erected on the surface of Isstvan 5, intended to be the stronghold of the War Master and his primary beachhead. In the distant images, the discernible banners of the sons of Horus and the Emperor's children loomed over the black sands of Urgul, alongside the traces of Mechanicum excavators' work and fragmentary defensive fortifications erected. Almost simultaneously, the ships of the Raven Guard, Salamanders and Iron Hands emerged from the warp and surged towards the Renegade's bastion. The response was multiple energy signatures and alarm signals, as the mobile launchers hidden in the sands of Isstvan immediately sent hundreds of void missiles skyward. Amid the blare of sirens, defensive squadrons soared into the air, but they failed to inflict the slightest harm on such an imposing retribution fleet. The absence of enemy ships was a strange phenomenon, yet entirely explainable. Surely they had to forcibly gather resources in distant systems in preparation for the upcoming battle and long war. Moreover, according to the Loyalists, the traitors were confident that no serious counterattack would be mounted against them. Ferrus Manus did not find this situation suspicious. He saw in it a chance to strike quickly and break the renegade's spine while they were weak, and within him burned the desire to punish Fulgrim for the affront. His intentions were shared by others, for the Retribution fleet had managed to reach the enemy at a preparatory stage for combat. Horus's bastion was only half built, and its fortifications far from complete. Hence the enemy was vulnerable. At least this was what the Loyalists believed. Meanwhile, legionaries from the World Eaters, Death Guard, Sons of Horus and Emperor's children settled on the defensive structures along the Urgul Depression's ridge. Behind them, long-range support squads guarded the fortress walls, and artillery pieces awaited the chance to shower the enemy with a hail of explosive shells. Hundreds of thousands of Astartes lay in wait on the northern edge, but the greatest threat was presented by Dis Irae, whose colossal guns were ready to punish the enemies of the War Master. Princeps Abstonet had received personal commendation from Horus for his deeds on Isstvan III. In the secret underground corridors of Urgul's northern sector, approximately 30,000 Astartes hid, their weapons fully battle-ready, and their souls filled with determination to see it through to the end. The last moments of calm were akin to torment for the rebels. They spent them as they could, staring into the grey sky of the dead planet, awaiting events that would forever alter the familiar visage of the galaxy. These minutes of silence seemed endless, for the only sound was the measured creaking of Mechanicum's scaffolding and the howling of the wind. The first signal of the offensive was the dim, rust-coloured glow that pierced through the clouds, enveloping the Urgul Depression in a hue, followed by a low roar that grew from a rumbling bass into a piercing wail. When the alarming klaxons sounded, streaks of light burst through the clouds, descending upon the surface in a stream of fire. Deafening explosions rippled across the ground, and rows of warrior soldiers were engulfed in flames. The earth groaned, clouds of sand erupted into the air, and the mountains in the barrage zone shattered. For long, sunlit minutes the Loyalists bombarded Isstvan 5, and then everything ceased. The echo of unleashed might vanished with the acrid smoke of explosions. The Emperor's children had excelled in the task of creating defensive structures, and the War Master's forces were well protected. From his vantage point in the fortress, Horus smiled as he saw the sky darken with drop pods and storm birds. He turned away from the galactic screens and addressed the commanders of his army standing behind him, Fulgrim and Angron, with a truly momentous phrase. "Remember this day, friends. The Emperor's lackeys have come to meet their fate." The anti-air systems were disoriented by the colossal number of targets. Thus they fired at random. Their shells reached their targets, and explosions blossomed en masse in the stratosphere, for it was hard to miss in such a dense flow of drop pods. However, for every destroyed transporter, 10 others survived and successfully reached the surface. The first 100 to land included Ferrus Manus himself, and his warriors witnessed a meteor shower of metal debris and remnants of those fated never to land. Indeed, some were even less fortunate. Some pods fell right into enemy clusters, and the fate of those soldiers remains unknown. Thanks to the Gorgon, his units found themselves away from the sectors of the defensive system's fire. The surface still trembled, but the slaughter had already begun, for the traitors needed only to emerge from cover to realize that the retribution squads were already among them. Brother fought against brother, superhuman clashed with superhuman. Power mauls and chain axes tore into layers of ceramite, striking sparks as bolters fired at point-blank range in vain attempts to penetrate power armor. The first minutes of battle claimed the lives of hundreds of warriors. Though the Astartes legions varied in traditions and temperament, their armament was largely the same. Thus only the most aggressive fighters and those favoured by fortune managed to survive. The fierce assault of the Loyalists bore its first fruits, and in the following minutes the number of drop pods and transporters increased. Forces of the Raven Guard and Salamanders arrived. Legionnaires reformed into battle lines and launched attacks through the woods and abandoned drop pods. In mere minutes, assault units occupied positions according to Ferrus Manus's plan. Before them loomed the fortified walls of the recently constructed fortress, from which deadly gun ports glared. Less than an hour had passed since the first landing, and the Loyalists were already fighting the traitors. When the fire points on the fortress walls opened fire, heavy tanks of the traitors emerged from their shelters and joined the bombardment. At that moment, the Loyalists were confronted with the horrific visage of a new war. Soldiers of the Imperial army loyal to the War Master were used as human shields. They were driven towards the guns of the Loyalists, which tore them to shreds. Their lives were worthless, thus they were discarded without regret. Deadly bursts of heavy bolter fire and laser beams rained down upon the Loyalists. Thus marked the entrance into battle of Dies Irae, the Titan of the Imperator class. The ground trembled under the steps of the mighty god machine as it moved through the hurricane of bolter rockets. Its super-powerful weapons carved fiery canyons through the Loyalists' ranks, shooting across the battlefield and threatening the concentration of equipment in the landing zone. A small sun flared in the middle of the grim desert. The Titan's plasma cannon fired, and within fractions of a second, a crater several hundred meters in diameter formed in the center of the Urgol depression. One salvo from Dies Irae brought death to 100 Astartes and turned the black sand into thick glass. On the Loyalists' left flank, squads of salamanders fought. They advanced northward towards the castle rampart, where the approaches to the fortress were riddled with trenches and redoubts. The Death Guard held the defense here, forcing the Loyalists to fight desperately for every square meter, flooding the trenches with promethium, to which the sons of Mortarion responded with poisonous gases. A mighty volcano advanced towards the bolter fire, delivering death to the renegades with sword strikes and plasma gun shots. Eyewitnesses claim that at one point an explosion of astonishing power bloomed at his feet, scattering his personal bodyguards, yet the Primarch continued to march forward, engulfed in flames and slaughter heretics with methodical calmness. On the right flank attacked the Raven Guard. Here the terrain consisted of a series of half-kilometre cliffs, sharp rocks and precarious boulders. On this front, the Sons of Horus held the defence. They fortified positions with aegis shields and barbed wire. Yet battles here occurred in an insanely chaotic manner, as the Raven Guard would suddenly appear from the shadows, attack the renegades, and disappear just as suddenly. On this flank, the greatest nightmare was Corax himself, diving upon the enemies like a predatory bird. Yet this did not break the sons of the War Master, and they continued to counterattack. As the Loyalists approached the fortress walls, the resistance of the renegades intensified, and soon the Gorgon's warriors met the Emperor's children and were horrified at the sight of the changes that had occurred to them. Their exquisite armor was marred by dangling strips of skin, and the self-mutilated warriors howled in ecstasy when struck by bolter rounds. Among their ranks were strange soldiers with unknown sonic weapons, whose oscillating waves killed legionnaires in Terminator armor and lifted clumps of solid earth into the air. But this did not frighten the Iron Hands, who were full of a desire to avenge the insults to their Primarch and subjugate those who had rejected imperial truths. On the central front, the most brutal battles took place, and here Ferrus Manus personally advanced with Terminators from the clan Averni and maniples of battle automata. The Primarch was in a state of inhumanly cold rage, tearing apart enemies with his bare hands. Where Gargon personally attacked, both the sons of Horus and the Emperor's children retreated, and behind him, under a barrage of fire, followed the legionaries in dark armor. Despite the increasing losses, the efforts of Gargon's sons were not in vain, for on the reclaimed patches of land, heavy armoured vehicles were already forming ranks and firing deadly shells towards the fortress. The wedge-like formation of Spartans and land raiders from the Salamander's legion concentrated the fire from their las cannons on the Titan Dies Irae. The barrage was so intense that the shields of the god machine glowed red-hot, forcing the princeps to withdraw the Titan into the fortress's shadows. Soon, the companies of the Fell Blades and Malcador joined the battle, with some contributing to the bombardment of the citadel, while others attacked heretic activity points on the slopes of Urgan. The din of battle was so loud that some warriors went mad with terror and fell to their knees, necessitating execution on the spot to protect the others. Nonetheless, the flanks of the traitors began to slowly buckle. The horrific shock characterizing the onset of the slaughter at the landing zone would be long remembered by all who survived Isstvan V. Records in the archives of terror have preserved the recollections of one of the Raven Guard named Jaka Zanak. This is how he recounted those brief moments on the planet's surface. My squad was honored to be in the vanguard, the first assault wave under the command of Ferrus Manus himself. Our targets were their positions on the left flank, right at the foot of their bastions. We were tasked with storming the front line to distract the enemy and their guns onto us, allowing the main forces to land behind us. This was a suicide mission, but we knew what we were getting into. Lord Corax personally had to choose who would be in the vanguard and who would advance with the Legion's main forces. My service record includes about 33 deployments in high-intensity conflict zones. The most severe were on Belphegor in conflict with the Orcs and on Lux Majoris during battles with Terracrat dissidents. But Isstvan does not compare to them. A legion fought with a legion as if we were battling our own twisted reflections. That landing was a living nightmare. Even considering the orbital bombardment that preceded our arrival, it was as if we were thrown into constant streams of artillery fire. I don't know how many pods were shot down, but we survived by some miracle. My Claw's pod went off course and we crashed into the wall of a redoubt. Had we deviated even more, we would have shattered against the enemy's void shields. They opened fire on us even before the doors were blown off. We got out and immediately started shooting, but found ourselves under bolter fire. There I saw the Emperor's children, and they had changed drastically. Their armor was splattered with blood. Bone necklaces and horrifying trophies dangled from their plates like savage headhunters. When we began tearing through their ranks, they screamed and laughed, and the laughter bizarrely amplified through their helmets, sounding wrong and insane. My Talon broke through their battle lines. 5 perished and 5 broke through. It was slaughter for survival, for our armor afforded no advantages, and ammunition ran out quickly, forcing us to gather what we could from the corpses. We charged towards the anti-aircraft guns noticed from orbit. They were shielded from above but vulnerable from the ground. Using melter guns and crack grenades, we destroyed 3 Sentinel cannons and neutralized the Icarus battery. Yet it was too late when we realized we had stirred a hornet's nest. They numbered in the hundreds, if not thousands, an imperial army. Throngs of maddened soldiers filled the trenches, pushed forward by the sons of Horus with whips like cattle. The sergeant fell. I was next in command, so I ordered a retreat, but the horde swept over us like a tide. I found myself mired in dozens of bodies, crushing their skulls with my fists left and right. Yet there were still many, so very many. Scores of fists and dagger blades pounded at me, clawing at the ceramite to find vulnerabilities between the plates. The armor's joints were clogged with spilled blood, and my autosenses shut down after a stubber shot struck the faceplate directly. But then something flared. The iron hands entered the field of vision. They incinerated this cannon fodder with flamers. The flames scorched me in hundreds of places, but I endured while the mortals did not. When I rose, their charred bodies cracked and crumbled into ash, falling off my armor. I will never forget that sound. I hear it in my dreams. My armor was damaged, so I had to fall back for repairs. Thus, I survived to fight in the rearguard alongside Lord Corax. No one else from my talon survived. I later noticed that the flamers of the Iron Hands disabled my chronograph, which recorded a mark of 7 minutes. 7 minutes. Everything I've recounted to you unfolded in 7 minutes. So much death in such a short span, and there was so much more to come. The Loyalist advance gathered ominous momentum, and the traitor Primarchs entered the battlefield. On the right flank struck Angron, his blood-splattered Terminators slaying indiscriminately, howling with rage like ancient beasts. He managed to drive a wedge between the Raven Guard and the Iron Hands, then moved to personally assault Corax. Loyalists perished at Angron's hands as easily as heretics fell to the 3 loyal Primarchs. On the left flank, the trenches filled with deadly gas, seeping through cracks and air filters, dissolving flesh. The cries of doomed legionaries heralded Death's arrival, who immediately began reaping his bloody harvest with wide scything arcs, cleaving paths of corpses among the ranks of the salamanders. Yet he fought utterly differently from Angron. He killed with sombre efficiency, without a hint of savagery or bloodlust, and his warriors fought with the same relentless grim silence. Where Mortarion stood, the assaulting waves of Loyalists broke against him like upon a rock. The Terminator squads of Justerin and Reaver, led by Abaddon, charged with unprecedented ferocity, while the Fire Support Division took positions on the edges of the Urgall Depression and began to bombard the enemy, only to find themselves caught in the crossfire of land speeder squadrons and the rays of salamander volkite weapons. The longer the carnage dragged on, the more apparent it became that it had turned into a meaningless bloodshed, growing even more horrific each time someone momentarily remembered that warriors who once swore the same oaths of loyalty were now slaughtering brothers with hearts ablaze with hatred. No one was destined to gain glory in this conflict, which threatened to end only with the death of the last of the Astartes. Among the Emperor's children appeared a warrior donning bright, flamboyant armor. He crashed into the ranks of the Iron Warriors, waves of physical ecstasy coursing through his body, battling with the fury of a madman. His armor was riddled with craters, dents, and chips, but the pain only brought him pleasure. He had even painted the armor plates in bright, screaming colors to ensure that all attention on the battlefield was focused solely on him. This was Julius Caesoren, and he had long discarded his helmet, for it hindered his enjoyment of the cacophony of battle. He was unconcerned with Horus's plans. The Maraviglia awakened in him forbidden desires that demanded constant satisfaction, and even in the heat of battle, he seized every opportunity to mock the bodies of his enemies. Some witnesses assert that he picked up the helmet of a slain loyalist, shook the head free from it, then tossed it into the air and shattered it with a short burst from his bolter fired from the hip. His ecstatic cry was echoed by sonic waves that stirred clouds of black sand into the air. Thus Marius Virusean joined the fray, clad in armor bedecked with spikes, from which shredded strips of leather hung in tatters. The Maraviglia had also marked him. Altered jawbones framed his perpetually agape mouth, from which emanated a scream. His ears were severed and replaced with phonocasters, and Virusean had simply done away with his eyelids, for he did not wish to cease admiring the colours of the surrounding world for even a second. In Marius's hands was that very massive musical instrument found among the remnants of Bekwakinska's orchestra, now adorned with spiked embellishments and numerous modifications that transformed it into a genuinely powerful sonic weapon. As if on command, Virosian and the Space Marines following him with similar instruments struck the keys, pedals and buttons, unleashing a tsunami of dissonant, cacophonous sounds of incredible power upon the charging Morlocks. Meanwhile, fleet auxiliaries appeared in the landing zones. Heavy infantry, artillery brigades and companies of heavy tanks surged forward, but their path to the combat zones was blocked by heaps of burning hulls of armor and the dead bodies of Astartes. The Imperial army moved so densely that any projectile fired at them found its target. This sowed chaos and discord within their ranks. At that moment, upon a signal from the Black Sands, suicide squads from the Death Guard and the World Eaters burst forth. They abandoned their hidden shelters and unleashed a veritable slaughter. While they could inflict little damage on the cumbersome armoured vehicles, once among the mass of ordinary mortals, they moved like wolves in a flock of sheep. In less than 3 hours, the instability of the front line became evident, and if the forces retreated in one direction, they advanced in another. The Black Sands were reddened with the amount of blood spilled. Supply of ammunition became impossible, and in some points, the cauldron of war boiled over into hand-to-hand combat. As chain swords had long since broken, ammunition was depleted, and bolters could only be used as clubs. In the confined space of the small Urgal Depression fought a number of Space Marines that had already conquered almost the entire galaxy for the Emperor, and none intended to retreat. Meanwhile, over the Loyalists' rear hung a massive red arc with scorch marks from anti-air fire on its hull. This was the battle maniples of Legio Atterus, outnumbering the enemy cohorts of Legio Mortis. According to Atterus's cold assessment, the survival probability of the renegades after their attack was less than 13%. They informed this to Gorgon, and the Primarch approved the decision to attack. Otherwise, Legio Atterus would have gone into deep defense. For the loyal Titans, this was the culmination of a long-standing feud between the Legios. Thus, the god machines roared and charged the enemy with righteous fury, making them the first legion of Titans to clash with their kind during the Horus Heresy. Their battle was short but brutal. The loyal Titans struck at the center of the enemy formation to gain tactical advantage. They destroyed the warlord Titan Thunder's Breath of Legio Mortis. The rogue Titan Red Nog dealt a fatal blow to the enemy Titan with a power fist precisely before its reactor was pierced by surviving Mortis Titan's shots. In the ensuing explosion, dozens of enemy Titans and Red Nog himself vanished. At the cost of their own annihilation, Legio Atterus inflicted colossal damage on the auxiliary contingent of Legio Mortis and forced them to retreat from the battlefield. By the end of the 3rd hour, both sides had lost approximately 40% of their personnel and were forced to disengage. Even the warlike Primarchs, Angron and Mortarion, retreated under the barrage of the Loyalists' heavy weaponry fire. Meanwhile, the Raven Guard and Salamanders began to withdraw forces from the front line to the rear for regrouping. Only Ferrus Manus, with the remnants of the Iron Hands, refused to relinquish the reclaimed patches of land to the enemy. In this horrifying battle, all tactical decisions lost their significance, because the Loyalists had slaughtered many renegades, breached their defences and halted the attack of Legio Mortis. But the enemies still held their positions. The fortress of the War Master still stood, and its guns continued to sow death. Meanwhile, the rest of the legions arrived in the system. The assembled armada encircling the planet was the largest in the history of mankind. There were battleships, scouts, and cruisers present. In the void, small shuttles and war barges navigated, while the decks of each vessel were prepared to accommodate a vast number of ready-for-deployment Astartes. Fidelitas Lex, the flagship of the Word-Bearers, became the site of a fateful gathering. Alongside the Word-Bearers were the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, and the Alpha Legion. The attendees held no illusions regarding the future, for the chain of events had already been set in motion, and there was no turning back. Of the 8 legions of Astartes present in the system, 4 had sworn allegiance to Horus. Worlds were rising against the Imperium, and if they were to proceed to Terra, the Loyalist legions required annihilation. Lorgar, appearing in the council hall, delivered a speech that was largely a statement of facts, a summation, and a preamble to the upcoming events. He clearly indicated that soon Space Marines would kill Space Marines, brothers would turn against brothers. They all journeyed by different paths, but arrived at a singular realization that the foundation of Imperial truth was a lie. The Imperium had deceived the Night Lord's hopes with the weakness of its laws, a decline in culture, and injustice towards its most faithful soldiers. The Emperor deprived the Iron Warriors of unity and never rewarded them for their spilled blood. And finally, the Emperor betrayed the word-bearers by building a galactic state founded on lies, which required sacrificing truth on the altar of necessity. And with Isstvan V would begin the purging. From the ashes of the deceitful Imperium would rise a new one, based on faith and enlightenment, governed and protected by living avatars of the gods. Only such an Imperium would withstand the fire of the blood-soaked future. Lorgar sensed their doubts, for the legions present could not yet call each other brothers. They were only to unite in the crucible of battle, which was soon to erupt. And when Aurelian finished his speech, something quite unexpected occurred as muffled clanking sounded behind him, its frequency increasing. The Space Marines exchanged ritual handshakes with the traditional martial gesture of alliance-making. And then Sevatar of the Night Lords was the first among the living to utter the words that would define the galaxy's future. Death to the false Emperor. When the skies once again were streaked by the vapor trails of transports, Ferrus Manus joyfully exclaimed at the thought of more brothers arriving. Now the Horus heresy would surely meet its end. It would burn in the retributive fire of the Emperor's loyal sons. The Alpha Legion deployed on the left flank, while the word-bearers took the right, and the Night Lords occupied positions around the perimeter of the Urgul Depression. The Iron Warriors landed directly behind the position of the Imperial army on the outskirts of Urgul, and immediately began assembling war machines and siege equipment to turn their own outposts into yet another impregnable stronghold. At that moment, Corax and Vulcan urged Ferrus to retreat, as their legions were exhausted. It was necessary to regroup, replenish supplies, and strike anew. Furthermore, it was necessary to give the forces of the second wave the opportunity to share in the glory of the great battle, but the Lord of the Iron Hands remained steadfast and unyielding, asserting that the traitors were already broken and only needed to be finished off. Moreover, when the dust settled a bit, he saw the one he had come to this cursed planet for. In the distance, on a hill, stood Fulgrim. The Gorgon had awaited this moment from the very day when his brother came to him with rot in his heart. He dreamt of revenge, and now understood that only one of them would return alive. Ferrus brought with him a sword he had once forged for Fulgrim, and by the irony of fate, the Phoenician had brought along a hammer of Ferrus's design. The Gorgon urged his brother to open his eyes and see that they were already defeated. The Loyalist forces were retreating, and the brothers who had arrived to help would soon finish what they started, and the Phoenician would hang alongside Horus. In response, his brother merely laughed, asserting that the War Master was not foolish enough to simply vanish in these black sands. Meanwhile, fresh Allied reinforcements awaited the command to join the fray. Forces that had not yet shed a single drop of blood were full of determination, and their numbers exceeded that of the first wave. Corax and Vulcan were marching at the head of their legions, preparing to regroup and calmly awaiting the opportunity to pass the banner of war to their Primarch brothers. Legionaries barely stood on their feet, many carrying with them wounded and deceased battle brothers. Victory was beyond doubt, but the price was exorbitant, for thousands of warriors already rested on the black sands. Horus's armadas had retreated, but no one wished to celebrate success in fratricidal slaughter. No one thought to relish the death of former friends, and no one intended to inscribe new writings over parchment scrolls. Only the bloody stripes that weavers and artists would mark on the banners of the legions would serve as a reminder. As they approached the Allies, the legionaries began sending requests for medical assistance, and then bewilderedly exchanged glances when there was silence on the Vox in response. Many legends circulated about that accursed battle, and chroniclers often wondered who first attacked and ultimately revealed all the cards. But the few survivors insisted that it was the warriors of the 17th. The granite-grey transports of the word-bearers landed next to the coal-black twins of the Raven Guard. Isstvan and Argyll Tal led their Gal Vorbak along the positions of the Iron Warriors, observing as the battle in the Urgalan lowlands disintegrated into chaos. The Iron Hands encircled their Primarch almost at the centre of the battle, paying dearly for their own obstinacy. The Salamanders merged into a single green torrent and moved towards Perturabo's positions, while the beleaguered Raven Guard fell back towards the positions of the Word-Bearers and Night Lords. When the red-painted Gal Vorbak squads took their positions, Argyll Tal watched his approaching brothers. He understood what was about to happen. The circles of targeting markers, which he had not activated, spun before his eyes, flickering over the blue lenses in search of prey. Below, thousands of Raven Guard warriors climbed the hill, none of their armour unscathed from battle. Despite the distance, Argyll Tal's sight allowed him to see that some had empty bolters hanging from their belts, and scrolls of oaths had turned into charred scraps of parchment fluttering in the wind. Anticipating the forthcoming, Tal growled the first command for readiness. 60 seconds. In that short minute which stretched into an eternity, each Gal Vorbak prepared in their way to spill the blood of their brothers. Some shed bloody tears, unseen under their helmets. Others simply wiped sweat from their eyes, while the overworked salivary glands of some oozed acid profusely. Some muttered meaningless words, while others switched the activation rune on their chainsword from the soft tissue mode to the armoured plates mode. At the 20-second mark, some warriors began hearing the voices of everyone they'd ever met in life, and their bones shook with an uncontrollable tremor. Finally, the moment of truth arrived. At the vanguard of the retreat walked Captain Theridion of the 29th Company of the Raven Guard. His empty bolter hung on a magnetic clamp, a gladius gleamed in his left hand, and from his once noble blue cloak only tattered rags remained. When they drew close enough, Argyll Tal's lips uttered a most nightmarish curse, dooming the Loyalists to certain death on the black sands of Isstvan 5. All word-bearers opened fire. Bolter shells struck Theridion's breastplate and pauldrons. His armour cracked, and he felt the received damage before it registered on his retinal display. The legionnaire staggered, feeling a bubbling liquid in his throat. A thick moisture accumulated in his chest, drowning him, as a blinding blue flash struck him from nowhere. There he died alongside many of his brothers on the ground, cleaved by Lascanon fire. The front ranks of the Raven Guard fell like wheat under a scythe, their path marked by a line of exploding bolter charges, fragments of armour, and bloody clouds. Astartes in black armour fell to their hands and knees, but continuous fire cut down those who fell below the initial fusillade, hitting them in the head and chest. Seconds after the bolters rattled, blindingly bright laser beams flared from behind the word-bearers' backs as the weapons of land raiders, predators, and defence turrets struck the warriors and the ground on which they stood. Argyll Tal saw only a minuscule part of the picture. Blue beams, as thick as his arm, flashed and seared the air above, leaving trenches in the ground and neatly slicing through bodies. Silently standing beside him were the Gal Vorbak, gripping axes and swords. The surrounding Iron Warriors and Word-Bearers were reloading haphazardly, resuming fire, throwing grenades and preparing to retreat. In the eye of the storm, Argyll Tal closed his eyes. The Vox channel to Theridion remained open long enough for him to hear the warrior die. Gurgling sounds echoed over the Vox until the captain fell to the ground. The entire Urgal was engulfed in a new wave of slaughter. The retreating Loyalists were gunned down at point-blank range by those who only a minute ago they considered brothers. Tanks and dreadnoughts caught off guard, having survived the most harrowing 3 hours, now exploded under a storm of rockets and shells. With the agility of predatory birds, The ships of the Night Lords swooped down from the sky, dropping phosphex and cluster bombs, followed by aggressive raptors. The sons of Alfarius burst into the rear apothecarians, finishing off the wounded, while their transports encircled the squads of salamanders, slicing through them with surgical precision. At the same moment, the artillery of the Iron Warriors spoke, concentrating fire on the Imperial army positions and the First Wave's landing zones. Meanwhile, Cerberus and Typhon tanks focused on destroying heavy equipment. In the heart of the battle, two demigods met in deadly combat, Ferrus and Fulgrim. The Gorgon struggled to tear his gaze away from the unfolding scene of massacre behind him, uttering a curse as he raised his sword. Fulgrim lunged forward, brandishing a hammer, and the power weapon forged in fraternal contest sparked a bright flash of energy that illuminated the dim battlefield for hundreds of meters around. Ferrus Manus wielded his fire blade fiercely, but every fiery swing was confidently deflected with the dark haft of the battle hammer, which he himself had wielded for 2 centuries in countless wars and the most nightmarish corners of the galaxy. Fulgrim, on the other hand, delivered wide, sweeping blows along perfect trajectories, the heavy head of the hammer roaring angrily in the air. Both Primarchs fought with a fury that only brothers divided by war could harbour for each other. Their armour blackened, cracked, and was pierced, gradually yielding to the monstrous hatred of the duel. Fulgrim savoured the true taste of pleasure in battling such a formidable opponent and strove to remember every swing of the fiery blade tearing at his flesh, every cry of pain escaping his brother's lips as the hammer struck the black armour. They whirled in the very heart of the maelstrom where Ferrus Manus's doomed Morlocks were falling one by one, yet taking with them the lives of loathsome monsters clad in the Emperor's Children armour. At one point the Gorgon managed to tear off the left shoulder pad from his opponent's armour. He attempted to twist and drive the deadly blades of his sword into the renegade's chest, but the Phoenician stepped aside, parried the sword with the hammer's hilt, and immediately brought the hammer crashing down on Ferrus's head. He failed to deflect the attack and fell to one knee. Seeing the fountain of blood gushing from his brother's head, Fulgrim did not notice that Gorgon, with his last effort, managed to pierce his armour, and now a flaming blade protruded from his abdomen. Pain engulfed the body of the Phoenician, and he recoiled, dropping the warhammer and instinctively clutching his hands to the wound. Both Primarchs fell to their knees and for a moment simply looked into each other's eyes. Then Manus rose with a snarl and charged toward the renegade brother with his fiery blade at the ready. A few seconds stretched into eternity for Fulgrim, but he had enough strength to pull out the Laren blade and deflect the blow. The Primarch of the Iron Hands lacked but a moment to finish the traitor. The Phoenician felt a surge of unnatural energy emanating from the violet amethyst. He heard ghostly whisperings, and even for a moment thought that his body no longer belonged to him. Then he rushed again with a primal scream at the brother who had managed to strike him down and pierce his chest with a silver sword. This time Manus fell to both knees and dropped the flaming sword. Fulgrim raised his sword for the final blow but hesitated to deliver it. At that moment, an unseen dark essence that had already taken deep root in his soul suddenly pushed him toward the final step. It seemed the blade itself in his hand twitched, the silvery edge reaching for Ferrus Manus, and Fulgrim felt the unstoppable surge of triumph of that ancient creature. Realizing the irreparable was about to happen, he desperately tried to stop his hand, but his own muscles no longer obeyed the Primarch of the Emperor's Children. The unnatural steel forged in the depths of the warp met the iron flesh of the unyielding Gorgon, and its flaming edge sliced through the skin, muscles and bones of Ferrus Manus with a shrill clang that echoed in the Empyrean. From the wound at the place where the Gorgon's head once was, a stream of blood gushed, followed by torrents of energy. Fulgrim staggered back and fell on his back, blinded by its unbearably bright light. The sword clattered onto the stones beside him. On Isstvan 5, a Primarch perished. For a few fleeting moments, the veil lifted from Fulgrim's eyes, and he realized the evil he had committed and understood the torments he had doomed the galaxy to endure. In the sounds of the massacre around him, he foresaw a future filled with blood and death, and the thought that he bore a vast part of the blame for the destruction of the Emperor's dream filled the Primarch with shame and remorse. Fulgrim looked around. Figures of the Emperor's children surrounded his blood, those who had followed him into the darkness of betrayal. Marius, Julius, thousands of others whom he no longer wished to see. The only thing he wanted at that moment was to end it all as soon as possible, and to be rid of the nightmare that was about to befall the galaxy. And in dialogue with the warp entity, he wished for peace and oblivion, for it all to end quickly. When he whispered his desire, the last barriers of the Primarch's mind collapsed, and he was filled with the sensation of alien elation, with which the being older than time itself filled the void of his soul. But only in that moment, when the being from nowhere possessed the flesh of the phoenix with a single touch, did he realize he had made yet another terrible mistake. Resisting was too late. The unfortunate Primarch fell into darkness, into the forgotten corners of his own subconscious, forever doomed to be a silent witness to the dreadful deeds of the new master of his body. A split second ago, the Lord of the Emperor's children stood upon the grim rock at the heart of Urgol. But now there loomed a mighty creature of chaos. Watching the duel between Ferrus and Fulgrim from afar was the Primarch of the Word-Bearers. The spectacle inspired him with awe and a faint smile, yet he still hesitated. He knew both brothers well, though he was not close to them, and for a moment memories of the past, from which he had torn the voice of his adoptive father, Cor Phaeron, overwhelmed him. After brief reflection, Aurelian raised his Crozius to the sky, and thousands of word-bearers followed him into battle to support the Gal Vorbak. There, Argol Tal was already fighting, feeling his flesh merge seamlessly with his armor. The spilled blood of his brothers soaked into his claws, as if the metal were alive. The Raven Guard's blade shattered against his armor, and his inner voice guided him where to expect danger. But his inner demon, Rome, cautioned him when he saw the shadow of immense wings, and among them appeared Corvus Corax. And in a fit of rage he began slashing through the ranks of the word-bearers with his claws. He landed, and the earth responded with a murmur. Silver talons shot out from the power glove openings, and over his shoulders soared shimmering wings of dark metal. Slowly and laboriously he raised his head toward the traitors. From a face whiter than imperial marble, black eyes glared, and on the pale features was carved absolute wrath, such as Argol Tal had never before witnessed. This emotion was deeper and more sincere than the rage that disfigured the faces of demons in the warp. And Argol Tal understood it was neither anger nor fury, it was beyond both, it was wrath that had taken physical form. Corax spun around, uttering a cry, and struck with deadly blades of the buzzing wings affixed to his jump pack. A group of word-bearers instantly turned into pieces, covered in ceramite flesh. Then the talons struck, and several warriors in grey were torn to shreds. Corax became a blurred shadow, slicing, cutting, and hacking with effortless ease, his slightest movement maimed. Around him, laser fire erupted, as the Iron Warriors trained their turrets on the most severe threat within range. The word-bearers caught under the barrage were cleaved, as were those slain by Corax's talons. But the beams flared at the edge of the Primarch's armor, never striking him directly. They left deep, scorched marks, but did not pierce through. The Vox was filled with a mixed chorus of the dying voices of the word-bearers. But he was not the only Primarch in this carnage. Lorgar's mace was already heavily stained with the blood of Corax's sons. Aurelian perfectly understood the prophecies of Kairos Fateweaver, which asserted that if he engaged in battle with Corax, he would die. However, he was not concerned that the gods would not be on his side in such a clash. He did not consider himself their slave, and his life belonged only to him. And in that moment, Aurelian thought only of the lives of his sons. And scorning all the dangers of the encounter, he charged at Corax. From the moment their weapons first clashed, Corax fought to kill, while Lorgar fought to stay alive. The battle was too fast for mortal eyes, both warriors pushing themselves harder than ever before. Corax dodged the Crozius, never once parrying a blow. He ducked, leaped back, or engaged his jump pack to rise above Lorgar's heavy strikes. Lorgar, conversely, desperately blocked his brother's attacks. Sweat pouring into his eyes, the massive pommel of the Illuminarum ringing like a church bell as it deflected the Ravenlord's talons. Few surviving witnesses managed to describe that fateful combat, the details of which the archivists of terror painstakingly collected. "What are you doing?" Corax shouted into his brother's face when their weapons locked. "What madness has possessed you?" Lorgar broke free and shoved Corax forcefully enough for him to lose his balance. The Ravenlord quickly righted himself. The jump pack spewed flames, carrying him back toward his brother. The pointed wings shimmered and unfurled, but Lorgar was ready for this. They scratched his armor, but the bearer of the word focused on deflecting the strike of the power claws. Securing a few safe moments for himself, Lorgar delivered a precise blow. The Crozius slammed into Corax's chestplate and hurled him away. The power field from the head of the Crozius struck with such force that a shockwave emanated from the battling brothers, toppling nearby Astartes to the ground. Corax rose again, attacking Lorgar on burning accelerators, squinting against the psychic golden glow surrounding the Urizen. The Raven piled onto his brother with all his might, and Lorgar skidded through the mud, scraping his soles against the earth. Both of Corax's gauntlets gripped the haft of the Illuminarum, singeing the shaft and the hands of the bearer of the word, who this time could not break free. "I bring truth to humanity," Lorgar exhaled. "You are destroying the Imperium, betraying your own kind." In the black eyes of the Ravenlord was a frenzy that Lorgar could never before have imagined. The tips of the talons, surrounded by crackling power fields, were now mere inches from Lorgar's face. "I will kill you, Lorgar. I know." He spoke through clenched lips, feeling the strength ebb from his body. "But I have seen the future. Our father will become a bloodless corpse upon the golden throne and will eternally scream into the void." Black eyes narrowed, and the Ravenlord's muscles tensed, increasing the pressure. "You are destroying perfect order." Lorgar's grey eyes glowed despite the strain on his body. "The opposite of chaos, brother, is not disorder, it is stagnation, lifeless and immutable stagnation." With his final gasp, strength left Lorgar, and his trembling hands could no longer hold his brother's weapon. "That's it," whispered Corax. "That's the death you truly deserve." His claws reached his brother's face, the searing metal slowly cutting into Lorgar's golden skin. Inch by inch, the golden flesh blackened as the claws sank into the meat of his cheeks. Even if he escaped, these scars would remain with him until his death. He knew this, but it did not concern him. The psychic flame engulfing them both flared brighter, responding to Lorgar's pain. Corax closed his eyes to save his vision, and this deprived him of a swift victory. Lorgar once again cast aside the Master of Ravens, the Illuminarium soaring, readying for a strike. Before Corax could rise on the smoky flames and descend upon Lorgar from above, the word-bearer deflected one of the gauntlets to the side, striking it with such force that it completely shattered. The scythe-length claws flew into the chaos of the surrounding skirmish, but by that time, the blow of the second gauntlet reached its mark. Meter-long claws penetrated into Lorgar's abdomen, their tips emerging from his back. Such a blow was of little danger to a Primarch. Lorgar only staggered when Corax yanked the claws upwards. They burned and sliced, rending the word-bearer's body. The mace slipped from his hands, but those same hands closed around Corax's throat, even as the Master of Ravens had cleaved his brother in half. The word-bearer stubbornly refused to yield, ready to go to the very end. "For the Emperor!" Corax exhaled, ignoring the grip of his weakening brother. Lorgar headbutted him, breaking Corax's nose, yet still failed to free himself. The Master of Ravens held firm, even as the second, third, and fourth headbutts obliterated his delicate features. "But he lied to us!" More blood than words came from Lorgar's mouth. "Father lied!" Corax withdrew his claws, inflicting more damage than with the first strike. Blood bubbled and hissed, evaporating on the power blades. "Father lied!" Lorgar repeated. He was on his knees, clutching his mangled abdomen. Corax's eyes were impassive as he approached, the sole remaining gauntlet rising to execute his brother. A grotesque sense of appropriateness and bitter irony of the moment weighed down on Lorgar. He couldn't move his legs, only pain remained in his body, and he could barely distinguish his executioner, vague outlines appearing in his vision. blurred images of scythe-like claws raised high. "Do it!" Lorgar shouted to his brother, but the claws in flight stalled against metal. The suddenly appearing Konrad Curze saved Lorgar from demise. While the two Primarchs tried to finish each other off, Argyltal and his Galvorbak fought a few steps away. With each slain enemy they smoothly descended into the churning vortex of carnage, and their inner demons wove ever tighter with their souls. It's hard to say at what moment some metaphysical trigger activated, and they began to transform into monstrous beings. Raum, who had settled within Argyltal, spoke to him of a divine scream that provoked the growth of the possessed's power. At that moment, an unstoppable surge of pain pierced through Argyltal's entire body. The pain was so intense that he attempted to kill himself, but despite the self-inflicted injuries, he did not perish. Despite the agony on the other side of Argyltal's eyes, a fierce resistance continued. He wished to die to feel nothing and not delve deeper into the corruption. From this, Raum found himself deeply locked within, stubbornly refusing to surrender. But soon the resilience of the word-bearer weakened, not because he believed the demon's words, but simply because his strength had finally run out. Argyltal closed his eyes, and Raum opened them. In the next moment, a keramit-covered cloven hoof pressed the choking Raven Guard into the dirt. Most of the crimson armour was covered with bulky layers of thick bone ridges and warty projections. It towered over the Astartes, though it was lesser than the Primarchs. Enormous limbs with multiple joints clutched and unclutched, and each of the long fingers ended with a black claw. The helmet was crowned with huge ivory-coloured horns. Against the bright fire of the cannons, it resembled the minotaurs from pre-Imperial Terran mythology. Its legs were bent backward, and coarse muscles bulged under the armour. Mighty black hooves left flaming prints on the ground. The Astartes helmet split at the cheeks and mouth grill, revealing a shark-like maw lined with sharp teeth glistening with pure acidic saliva. The demon drew air into its chest and roared towards the retreating ranks of the Raven Guard. A terrifying wave of sound crashed over the Astartes, as if an earthquake was laughing over them. Dozens of them fell onto their hands and knees. The left lens of the mangled helmet was surrounded by a golden sun, the only thing that revealed the human being it once was. The very appearance of such a creature on the battlefield not only shocked the enemies, but also caused the Loyalists to doubt the Imperial truth, which eloquently stated that demons did not exist. Konrad Curze, who saved Lorgar, also saw what the Galvorbak had become. He uttered a curse toward Lorgar and began to hack through the ranks of the Raven Guard. The Galvorbak, in turn, continued the hunt on the orders of their Primarch. Trapped in the Virgal lowlands, the Loyalists were steadily annihilated. The entrenched Iron Warriors mowed down the Salamanders and the Raven Guard with continuous fire. Their work was finished by the War Masters Astartes. The bodies of the fallen were gradually enveloped by black, sticky sand. The warriors of the Alpha Legion finally shed the mask of loyalty to the Emperor under the grim sky of Isstvan V, shooting those who considered them their battle brothers. Dis Irae returned to the battle once again, towering like a colossal demon from ancient legends, annihilating the Loyalists with volleys of its formidable weapons. The incredibly intense white flame blazed through the ranks of the Astartes, fusing men into sand in horrific sculptures of charred bones and black glass. Traitor tanks thundered across the Urgal, firing their weapons and crushing the wounded beneath their heavy treads. The Iron Hands were cut down entirely. Their Primarch was last seen near a low, ominous rock, surrounded by a horde of howling mutants. Few knew what fate befell him. Frustrated by his feigned retreat, Angron crushed the Loyalists with doubled fury, his chain axes spraying fountains of blood with every wide swing. The Lord of the Red Sands had become a brutal barbarian, seemingly having lost his mind to uncontainable rage, while his World Eaters tore through Loyalists with a relentless aggression akin to maddened inspectors. Where once the noise of battle was deafening, it became unbearable to human ears. The Urgal reached its end under an impenetrable shroud of continuous voices, screams of pain and wrenching cries of hatred. Only infrequent bursts of explosions and bolter volleys pierced through this cacophony. But the massacre did not even think of ending. Separate groups of loyalists in scattered pockets of resistance fell to crossfire, and the few survivors were savagely finished off with chainswords and axes. Mortarian's soldiers mirrored with complete silence and retaliated with precise bolter volleys. Following their Primarch, whose tattered cloak fluttered in the streams of hot air, the Reaper struck down loyalists with deadly sweeps of his battle scythe. Lucius and Eidolon led the finest warriors at the vanguard of the Emperor's Children assault on the heart of the surrounded enemy. The elegant dance of the swordsman sowed confusion in the hearts of loyalists as it left a bloody path in its wake, and Lucius himself often laughed with joy from the music of battle, accessible only to him. The orchestra of Versian tilled the black sand with sound waves repeatedly, to mix flesh with metal and bury the surviving loyalists forever. His brother, Julius Caesaron, no longer fought and engaged in vile desecrations of the fallen bodies. It mattered not to him whose body lay before him, loyalist or traitor. He happily added to his collection of skin patches on his armor. Among the dead bodies on the battlefield prowled Fabius Bile like a vulture. Occasionally he lingered over corpses that caught his interest and performed gruesome surgical manipulations. There was no doubt he was collecting samples for future experiments. Trailing behind him was a dozen warped Emperor's Children and vile mutants, aiding the mad surgeon in his perilous experiments. No one knew where Fulgrim, the beautiful Primarch and schemer, was, having left the remnants to deal with the remnants of the Iron Hands Morlocks. Yet even in his absence, the Emperor's Children fought with their previous fierce elegance. Soon even Horus himself left his shelter and walked across the Urgol sands, surrounded by Terminators. 2 former sons of Malice fought beside him, and the traitors cast admiring glances at the magnificent black armor of the warrior and the amber ornaments on his chest, gleaming bloodily in the fire of battle. The attempt to stop the warrior ended in complete failure, and the loyalists could only fight to fall with honor. Yet among them were some worthy fighters who found vulnerabilities in the closing ring of enemies and broke free from the encirclement. Tiny groups broke through the circle and, along with wounded brothers, reached functioning shuttles. A small detachment of Raven Guardsmen managed to break through the ranks of the Emperor's Children, attacking them with power claws and swords. The enemies were too engrossed in the pleasures of pain which worked against them. Under the leadership of an unnamed captain, this squad made its way to a hidden cave in the Urgol Mountains. There lay a surviving transport craft upon which the Astartes managed to lift off with the grievously wounded Primarch Corax on board. No one knew of Vulcan's fate. The remnants of his legion were splintered by the blows of the Night Lords and the sons of Alpharius, and perished on the black sands under bolter fire. However, a few surviving salamanders managed to escape. They even found the Primarch's helmet and pieced together the last fragments of his life. The obtained information kindled hope in the hearts of the warriors that Vulcan was alive. Only a few from the Iron Hands detachment survived, and their grief from the Primarch's loss was incomparable. The Iron Hands remained a shattered and orphaned legion whose remnants joined Vulcan's space marines to save their brother's gene seed. But their success seemed a mere drop in the ocean of betrayal. Within several hours it was all over, and the bodies of 200,000 Astartes lay among the grim sands of Isstvan V. Soon, an enormous stage of cylinders was erected on the planet's surface with astonishing speed, upon which the War Master delivered his triumphant address. He spoke of the bravery of the soldiers loyal to him, of the hard work they had done, and how much more was yet to be done. Thanking the loyal warriors, he raised his claw skyward and shouted, "Are you with me to the end?" And the crowds of warriors answered, "Hail, Horus!" The echo of the shout lingered in the mountains long before it faded. The Isstvan massacre concluded, and the warrior buried the Emperor's dream of dominion over the galaxy in the Black Sands. For a time, the traitor fleets lingered within the system until each departed on its own missions. But few know that Corax's transport was shot down after takeoff and crashed at the outskirts of Urgol. From that moment, the surviving loyalists, under the leadership of the Raven Lord, conducted guerrilla warfare for another 98 days against the remaining Iron Warriors and World Eaters still on the planet. Only then did Corax manage to escape and set course for Terra in search of a way to restore his legion. Astartes from the Shattered Legions waged guerrilla warfare, harassing the War Master's fleets wherever they could. Yet this did not alter the broader world picture. The path to Terra had opened, and all advantages were on the side of the War Master.